How you doing, folks? You're watching Onward with Onrie. I'm your host, Kompan, and this week I have a confession to make. 14 years ago, I released my first comic, and it sucked. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, but I knew I could do better. You see, the reason I got into comics in the first place was to make the kind of stuff that I would want to read. When I failed to do that, I had to take a good, long, hard look at myself, and that was a difficult thing to do. Because in order to move forward, I would have to accept all of my shortcomings. It took me no time to come to this realization for a number of reasons. First off, no one was interested in publishing my book. I remember a publisher actually walking away from me in the middle of a pitch. It was humiliating. Second, I looked at the work and wasn't satisfied with what I produced. I knew I could do better. And finally, I lacked the confidence to expand my own comic beyond the first issue. I couldn't blame my artist for the fact that my first comic sucked. I couldn't even blame the printer for the way it was printed. This was my fault, and my fault alone, and it was now up to me to fix it. Most people would have probably given up at this point if they had the same realizations. I'm glad that I didn't. Being honest with yourself can be brutal but necessary at times. This is what forced me to look in the mirror and ask myself what I was willing to do to get to where I wanted to go. Looking in the mirror and staring at the person whose reflection you see can be daunting at times. When we look into the mirror, we see ourselves how we feel. When we feel confident, we admire our charming looks, but when we feel down about something, that's when we see ourselves for all of our imperfections. This is what releasing your comic book into the world feels like, only now it isn't just you staring at yourself. Everyone who reads your work is going to have some sort of reaction. Now, there is a theory that the more you create, the better you'll naturally get because you'll learn things along the way. The idea is that practice makes perfect. And while there may be some truth to that, I personally believe that the term practice makes perfect isn't good enough. If you're repeating the same mistakes over and over again, hoping for different results, that is the textbook definition of insanity. So then what is perfect practice? It's doing things a bit more deliberately but consistently. It's about perfecting technique as opposed to turning over work at greater speed. It's about rhythm as opposed to repetition. And most importantly, it's about focusing and being alert at all times. Forget about quick results. If you're serious and want a career in comics, you need to look at yourself in the mirror and evaluate where your strengths and weaknesses lie, and then be honest about fixing them. For example, in the world of martial arts, the theory of perfect practice makes perfect is taken very seriously. Simply going through the motions isn't what makes you stronger. It's constantly reworking those basic techniques until your mind and body are totally in sync and your reactions become second nature. No matter what craft we pursue, we all start off sucking, and only those who can recognize this and accept it can grow. In all my years in this business, I don't think I've met a single person who was ever satisfied with the first thing that they ever created. It's because they went back to the drawing board every time they got a rejection letter and forced themselves to improve based on what their critics told them that they now have a career. It's easy to get swept up by how your friends and family react to your work when they tell you how awesome it is. A true professional demands more and knows that they need to step outside their comfort zone. See, our friends and families always have our best interests at heart, and sometimes they avoid being honest with us because they don't want to hurt our feelings or just don't understand this field. And they can't really be the judge of whether or not the mass market is going to dig your work unless they themselves work in the field. It's important that you get your work out there and get it critiqued. Let an editor or publisher rip you apart. Let them throw every nasty thing they can at you, and believe me, they will. And when that happens, know that you aren't alone. Someone else is probably experiencing the same thing you are at this very moment. At some point or another, all the writers and artists you look up to have been rejected in perhaps even worse ways. Sometimes it's essential to listen to the people who are so fired up by what they hate about your work that you're inspired to prove them you're worth a damn. Don't forget you're you, and you can overcome this if you put the time in. Take the hit. Find your inspiration, take your time, focus, and address your shortcomings. That is how perfect practice makes perfect. In time, you'll develop instincts and abilities you never thought you had, and that will give you confidence. All right, folks, we'll see you next week with a brand new episode. Until then, onward to victory.